The Roaring Twenties, Section 2, with Ms. Lashi. Naval arms race continues. Many countries were buried in debt from World War I, but they continued to build up their military. This was scary because militarism had contributed to the outbreak of World War I. 1921, 8 countries met in Washington, D.C. to discuss disarmament. Disarmament is the reduction or reducing the size of the militaries to have less tanks and ships and munitions and ammunitions stockpiled. Five-Power Naval Limitations Treaty. The Five-Power Naval Limitations Treaty was signed by Britain, France, Japan, Italy, and the United States. It was created to limit the number of battleships that some countries had. For example, the US and Britain were allowed to have 15 battleships for every 5 that France and Italy had. Britain and the US could have 15 battleships for every 9 battleships that Japan had. These ratios were meant to make the other countries weak while making the US and Britain's navies superior. So this really was not fair to anybody but the United States and Great Britain. For France, Japan, and Italy, it meant that their navies would always be smaller or weaker than that of the United States or Britain, giving them an upper hand or an advantage. So the Five-Power Naval Limitations Treaty was not fair for other people involved. Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1928. U.S. and 14 other countries agreed to abandon war and settle all disputes by peaceful means. Well, this sounds like a great idea. In reality, this never had any impact on world affairs at all. So, great idea trying to maintain world peace, but not so great in the implementation of this treaty at all. Automobiles. Automobiles were made affordable by Henry Ford and the assembly line. They became a huge part of American life. 21 out of 26 families owned cars. The assembly line. The assembly line was an innovation that improved the production of automobiles. It made automobiles or cars more affordable. Cars were produced on a massive scale and efficiently. The assembly line in mass production was aided by machinery, helping to increase the supply and lowering cost of goods. In an assembly line, operations or tasks are divided among many people, speeding up the process to produce goods. American standard of living in the 1920s. The American standard of living continued to rise throughout the 1920s. More people were buying homes and cars, but largely on installment plans. Work hours decreased, giving people more leisure time. Wages increased, giving people more disposable income. Installment plans are when you're making monthly payments. Let's say if you purchase something for $200, you pay $25 a month until you pay off that item, usually with interest though, so it costs a little extra. Leisure time is time that people can do what they want. If they want to go to the movies, they want to go play some sports, watch TV. Of course, TV wasn't something around at this time. That would be their leisure time. Disposable income is money that people have left over after all of their bills are paid. Their housing, their electricity, their water, their clothing, their food, and anything else they might need. And the extra can be spent on luxury items like attending sporting events, going to the movies, buying jewelry, buying new clothes, things that aren't necessarily a necessity. Henry Ford. Henry Ford used the first assembly line in 1913 to build cars. The time it took for one car to come off the assembly line reduced from 93 minutes to 10 seconds by 1925. And this is because you have the operations or task being done by the same person. The same person is putting the tire on every single car. So they get in a rhythm. And of course, that very first car to come off the line in the morning is going to take longer. But after that, it's 10 seconds. Every 10 seconds, there's another car rolling off the line. And it was very fast and efficient and lowered the cost of the goods. It improved the pay for the workers because Henry Ford put more money back into their pay. And it also reduced the hours they were working. So it was overall good for Henry Ford and his workers. The Model T. The Model T was introduced by Henry Ford. It was produced on an assembly line. Cost in 1908 was $800. The cost in 1914 was $490, and workers' pay was doubled to $5 a day. The cost in 1925 was $294. So as you can see with the use of the assembly line, it dramatically reduced the cost to produce the car, and at the same time, Henry Ford put some of that money back into his workers by increasing their pay. Electricity becomes more readily available. New labor-saving devices are invented. electric irons, vacuums, washing machines, refrigerators. New labor saving devices changed the American way of life and gave people more leisure time. Since we had electric irons to iron clothes, it took less time. The refrigerators stored food for longer periods of time. The washing machine meant that you didn't have to sit there and wash your hands by clothes. So by freeing up this time, it meant that people could go do other things instead of doing chores. Charles Lindbergh. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh made the first solo transatlantic flight across the Atlantic Ocean. He flew from New York City to Paris. His plane was called the Spirit of St. Louis. He was a major celebrity of the time. His son was kidnapped and he died likely from injuries sustained during the kidnapping. It was a major news story. So Charles Lindbergh is the celebrity of the 1920s in America. Everybody wants to know him, everyone wants to be around him, everybody knows his name because he made the first solo transatlantic flight, which means he was the first person to fly alone by himself, solo, across the Atlantic Ocean from New York City to Paris by himself. Huge celebrity of the 1920s. Radio. Radios were made possible from the availability of electricity. In 1929, 12 million radios were used across the nation. They were used for news, sports, soap operas, music, advertisements, and other forms of entertainment. Families would gather in the home and listen. Most radios were purchased on installment plans, where they would make monthly payments until they paid off the purchase of their radio. Spending. Spending increased dramatically after World War I. People began using installment plans to purchase higher-priced goods. Installment plans are when you put a little down and make monthly payments, usually with interest. Some people started buying on credit past their income. Higher wages meant that people had more disposable income. Attitudes changed about debt and it became more acceptable to buy on credit. So before World War I, having debt was a horrible thing to have. It was very shameful. It wasn't something you wanted to have. After World War I, debt becomes more acceptable and they're like, okay, when you're purchasing things on installment plans and spending beyond your means, which means you're spending more money than you're bringing in, you're putting yourself in a very bad financial situation, and it can cause problems because if you don't pay that loan back, that's going to cause problems for the bank or the creditor that you borrowed the money from, and then they're not going to be able to repay the money that they borrowed the money from in order to loan it to you, and it's going to be a domino effect, and we're going to start to have some problems in the economy because of it. Investment. People began to speculate or invest money in the hopes of making a profit. Some people purchased real estate and others purchased stocks. Many purchased stocks on margin. Buying on margin is putting a small amount down and borrowing the rest from a bank. This, of course, is going to cause problems because if you buy on margin, we're only putting a little bit of your money up front, let's say 10%, and you borrow the other 90%. If the price of the stock falls, then you still owe the bank the other 90%, but you have nothing to show for it. It's going to cause some problems in the economy as well.